Thank you, John. We're honored to have you here tonight. And we'll ask the other participants in our panel, Dr. Brad Reed and Dr. Perry Moore, to come up and sit on the movie set up here that we've prepared. And we promised to get you out at 8:30, so we've got just a few minutes to question John. And we don't often have the opportunity to question the #1 auditor in America, so here's your chance. There are comment cards on your tables, and if you'd like to submit a question, please feel free to write it on one of these cards, and we've got some folks who are going to circulate around and pick those up. Let me introduce our panel this morning. Our interviewers for the discussion forum are Dr. Brad Reed and Dr. Perry Moore. Dr. Reed is professor of business law and ethics, as well as being the managing partner of the Dean Institute. Brad is a nationally recognized scholar, a prolific publisher, thought leader nationwide. He joined our faculty this past fall after 35 years on the faculty at Abilene Christian University in Texas. He's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma and the University of Texas Law School. He practiced corporate law for several years before he began his academic career, and now he's joined our faculty as the senior scholar of the Dean Institute. Dr. Perry Moore, who is sitting just to Brad's right in the middle, is a professor of accounting and director of our Master of Accountancy degree program. Dr. Moore is a CPA. He's a graduate of the Terry College at the University of Georgia, where he earned his PhD. He's a popular speaker at conferences not only all over the United States, but abroad. In fact, just last night, he flew in late from San Diego, where he addressed the annual meeting of the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy there yesterday. And so, Perry, we're thankful you were able to get back safely. NASBA, by the way, is the body that administers the CPA exam in all 50 states, among a number of other services to the profession, which I'm sure almost all of you are aware of. But I want to point that out because another feather in our cap here at Lipscomb is that the CEO of NASBA is a Lipscomb alum, David Costello, and we're proud of that. So would you join me in welcoming Dr. Reed, who will moderate the panel, Dr. Moore, and again John Fogarty, who will sit under the white-hot light of the third degree. And again, please feel free to submit some questions, and we'll take those as you submit them. Please join me in welcoming the panel.
Well, Mr. Fogarty, of course, we're delighted to have you here this morning. I hope the audience will submit some questions. We do have people who collect your cards, so by all means do that. I think Perry and I will alternate questions, and I'll allow Perry to begin first.
Thank you. The Blue Ribbon Panel has recently released its final report, which appeared to call for a separate gap for non-public entities. What's going to be the impact on auditing standards and public accounting firms if two gap systems are created?
Well, that's a great question, but actually, for once, I think we're a little bit ahead of the game on this. The auditing standards, both internationally and the ASB standards, are framework neutral. So, in fact, they have been for some time. And if you look at the ASB standards, we've had other comprehensive bases of accounting in that literature for a long time. So I don't really think that the creation of another accounting framework will impact the auditing standards directly. However, I do think the growing number of very difficult judgments to be made in accounting standards does affect the auditing standards, because how do you audit judgments is a crucial question, but not particularly related to the Blue Ribbon Panel. Now, how does this affect firms? Well, I think obviously every time you have yet another set of standards, it complicates things, because then what do you do? Does everybody have to learn everything, or do you specialize people? And there's pros and cons to that, certainly depending on the sizes of the firms and their clients.
Here's a question from a member of the audience. How do you view different requirements for private companies versus public companies with SEC requirements and so forth?
Are we talking about I'll assume we're talking about the accounting aspects, but
Yes.
of course there are also changes in whether you're auditing a public company or a private company. I think sometimes we get kind of lost in the public versus private when the real issue is complexity versus simpler. And there can be very simple public companies and very complex private ones. So I'm not sure that just dividing public and private is really that good of a thing. But on the other hand, certainly public institutions have greater responsibilities to the wider range of investors than do private companies, because the private investors often can gain the information that the folks in the public company arena cannot so easily do.
We know Sarbanes actually had a lot of impact on the audit and on American business. A key focus of that was on governance. As a partner, how has Deloitte seen that change, and what are the conversations with the board and the audit committee like today?
Well, that's a great question. I'm sure some of my other partners here could chip in on that. I'll offer a few thoughts. I think Sarbanes-Oxley certainly has put a spotlight on governance. I think it has caused better and deeper discussions between auditors and audit committees. As I think, as alluded to earlier this morning, the range of topics in these discussions has become much more broad, and a lot of times it's out of the comfort zones of the auditors and the audit committee members. But nevertheless, I think the breadth of these dialogues and the depth of them in many of these areas is very, very constructive, and I think it's a real change for the better, not just improving and improving.
Another question from the member of the audience, and I'd like to tie it into a question I had as well. My question had to do with the burden and cost for small businesses and how you see that unfolding. The question from the audience, I'd like to try to fold into that. The individual says, I'm a developer, owner, operator of real estate. Can you give us some practical advice about how to go about choosing an audit firm? What are some critical elements to consider in that choice?
Well, the first is that it start with the letter D. No, seriously. Well, attorney was selling Lipscomb. Well, Tom will probably kill me for saying this, but I do think that different firms and different are really good at different kinds of things. And I think some of the smaller accounting firms have outstanding people who concentrate in certain areas of practice, such as you described, and they can serve that market extremely well. I think, if you look at larger organizations, there are many benefits to that are obvious, the expertise, the breadth, and so forth. But with that comes, the disadvantages of dealing with a large organization. So my advice would be, go for the people who have the expertise in your particular area and practice extensively in your industry and business.
You addressed this somewhat, because when a corporate scandal occurs, the frequent question is, where were the auditors? We particularly heard that about 10 years ago, Tyco, WorldCom, Enron. But we haven't heard it as much lately. I don't know whether that's because we've better positioned ourselves, but will that become less frequent as standards converge, or is it unrelated?
Well, I've been very, very grateful to Charlie Sheen lately for monopolizing the media. I'm not hoping that will go on. But seriously, the refrain, where were the auditors, is going to go on forever. I mean, it's just a feature of when things go wrong, people look for some reason, and that's only natural. I do think, though, that not just the auditing standards, but the whole emphasis now on governance and the importance of the audit and the dialogue that we're all having about what does an audit actually mean, I think that will serve to help people better position what an audit can and can't do. And I was very encouraged by the fact that during the financial crisis, you really didn't hear a lot of people running about saying, oh, the auditor should have stopped all this. Very rarely did you hear that. But now, I think like the House of Lords, you are hearing, well, that wasn't really their job, but is there more that they could do? And I think that that's worthy of discussion, and I think we probably could.
Another question from a member of the audience, certainly an issue that we all saw unfolding during the financial crisis. Your thoughts on fair value accounting, especially in the banking industry?
Oh dear. How many people are in the banking industry? Well, I've had another memorable moment about that subject, which was something like this. If you stick with historical cost, you know you're always wrong. At least if you have fair value, you've got some chance of being close to being right. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think the fair value issues that arise when there really is no market create great stress. We've experienced that, and it's extremely difficult for companies and auditors to really have appropriate support and evidence for those measurements. And it really does come down to being the best you can do and trying to narrow the range of possible answers, but recognizing it is not precise. And I think about the Price Waterhouse report down to the penny from 1903. That's simply not possible in today's world.
We do have a few of our students here, our current students. Talk about how you went from Macaulay in Chattanooga to a position of pretty much prominence.
Well, that's
what
very
were the,
gracious of you.
but what were the steps along the way, and what might they learn?
Well, when I graduated from high school, I wanted to be a chemical engineer. And I started down that road, and I decided that really wasn't going to work out for me. And I'm probably not unique in that. But I wouldn't change that for anything, because I think the discipline of science and engineering is very, very important to the discipline of thinking about auditing and accounting. I mean, they're totally different subjects, but the rigor and discipline of the thought process is actually quite similar. So I guess my advice is not to go out and be a chemical engineer, by the way, is that you look across many disciplines for things that are applicable to what you're doing. Don't just think about accounting and auditing as a body of knowledge unto itself. It's not really. And the second thing is, through your career, don't just assume that there's a plan out there that somebody has in a drawer for you. You have to make your own plan and execute it.
Tell us a little about the international convergence of standards. Is this a good thing? Are there a lot of bumps in the road still in that process? Just your overview of how that process is going.
Well, I can speak from personal experience with the convergence of international auditing standards. I'm not directly involved in the accounting standards, but I've been a great proponent of global standards, and probably the principal reason for that is we have a global economy, and I'm very, very concerned about the ramifications of global, or rather regulatory arbitrage. And one of the ways that happens is people seeking regimes that have more lax auditing standards and lax audits. And global standards is one piece of fixing that. It is a bumpy road because there are many different cultures and approaches to auditing, which I've come to appreciate in my years at the International Auditing Standards Board. And it's a fascinating thing, but I think we've made huge progress in the new International Standards Auditing, which for almost entirely the Auditing Standards Board is now adopted for use in this country for private companies. And I think it does a very good job of balancing the objectives of audits, with a reasonable set of requirements to execute, and then guidance to help people apply those requirements. And I think it's a very good balance, and I think it will contribute greatly to improving the effectiveness of audits throughout the world. So on balance, I think it's a very good thing.
Please talk about the peekaboo inspection process. There was the initial perception that there may be one standard publicly and then a higher standard privately, and has that improved?
The word improved again. Well, this is a fascinating subject because I think if you look at the PCAOB's inspection process, I'll tell you it's very thorough. It is done to a high degree of professionalism. It is deep as well as broad. And frankly, their comments have substance. They're not trivial. So I'm very respectful of their process. However, they are a regulatory body. And they have a lot of regulatory lawyers as part of that organization. And the dynamic is, well, we have to inspect, we have to enforce, so we'll write a rule so that we can enforce and inspect. And then when they go out and inspect and say, well, we found a lot of people didn't do this, well, we'll make another rule so we can inspect and enforce. Well, you can see that over time, that will build up an enormous level of rules and very prescriptive rules. And I'm very worried about where that leads us, because if you have too many rules, you reach the point where people are simply checking off rules instead of really applying principles and able to deal with situations where you don't have a clearly applicable rule. So I hope we can come to a point where there's a good balance there. I also say that the business of inspection, whether it's external or internal, really does get down to inspecting whether people have exercised good professional judgment. And that's always going to create a tension. And that tension, I think, for the most part, is a healthy one, even though it's not very pleasant when you're the one being inspected.
We're going to run out of time in a few minutes, and so I'm going to apologize in advance if we don't get to your particular question. We have some excellent questions from the audience. Here's another one. Would the practice of including management letters with an audit help satisfy requirements for transparency, or will this ultimately turn into boilerplate as well?
Well, I'm very much of the view anything that goes into the public domain is subject to strong forces toward boilerplate. It's just natural standardization of the language. As I said, though, in my remarks, I'm not sure that that renders it worthless, because even so, it does put that focus on what's behind making those disclosures. I do think it is important for people in the investor world to realize that it's not just about the audit and the auditor. There's an entire structure of governance. There's management, the audit committee, the auditor, the internal auditors, and they really need to hear from all of those. So I think having communications from all of those legs of the stool would be really important.
I think we're going to have to wrap up our question and answer period now, and we'll ask Dean Stevens to conclude our morning together.
Thank you very much.